Welcome back, folks. This is Steve, and I am here with a My Story, air quotes, I love air quotes, My Story for DOScember. And if you're new to the channel, I do ham radio stuff, which is all this fancy gear behind me, and I also do vintage computer stuff. You can look in my catalog and find some Commodore 64 vids, like this one over here, and some ZX81 vids, and some MS-DOS PC build vids, and some exploring MS-DOS and DOS command line utility type stuff, and more DOS content, and more retro computer content, and more ham radio content coming your way. Before we go any farther, there's a couple of buttons down below: the subscribe, the join, the like, the share, the bell, all that stuff. Click a whole bunch of them. It'll make you happy. Alright, so, my DOS story, how I got involved in the whole DOS world and computers in general. I like to tinker with stuff. I mean, it's kind of what's going on there. And so my parents, because I was, an early teenager, probably 13, had a couple of computers. One was a Tandy 1000, yay. And the other one was a computer that they had gotten from another guy in the area that had built it himself. And it was a 10 megahertz XT with a monochrome screen and a Hercules card in it. And they let me play on it. Go to town, have fun. And they got all these magazines. We got PC Magazine and we got Byte. Byte was pretty cool. We got Computer Shopper. That was a big one. That was a beast. That magazine read you. You didn't read it. And I read these magazines cover to cover. We got like the CompuAd catalog. I even looked through that and sort of learned about all the different specs of all the different computers and everything that was out there. This computer that they had DOS 3.3 on it, which is why I've got all those DOS 3.3 videos and utilities and command line stuff that I had collected over the years, because that's how far back it was when I got started. And I was playing around with it one day. And I learned how to make directories and change directories and move files between directories and delete files. And I like to be organized. Might be hard to tell, but I like to be organized. I've got an organization video in my channel too. And so I went into a directory, and what I wanted to do, what my goal was for that exploration segment, was to clean everything out of the root directory of the C drive. And so I made a directory and I moved everything, and I mean everything. I moved autoexec.bat, I moved configsys. I even went so far as to remove the extra attributes on the io.sys and ms-dos.sys files and move them out of the directory. And then for good measure, I ran the disk defrag tool, which cleaned up all the space where those files used to be. You see where this is going? And then I'm like, cool, it's all clean. Look how wonderful that is. I'm such a good boy. And I turned the computer off, and then when I came back in the next day and turned it on, it didn't work. You guys probably know why it didn't work. And my parents were not computer geeks like I am. And their first response, which is pretty cool, I mean, I really appreciate it my parents did this. No anger whatsoever. My dad just looked at me and he said, okay, you fix it. So I spent that summer between school years trying to figure out how to fix it. And I had done a whole bunch of stuff. And really what it had wound up doing was giving me the confidence just to go in and hack at it. Because it's a DOS computer. You can boot DOS off of a floppy drive, and you're right back in business, and you can put your configsys and autoexec.bat on the floppy disk, and you're right back in business. So my dad did that, and the computer was up and running, and it was the secondary computer. So it wasn't that big of a deal that it didn't boot off the hard disk. And so I was able to get in there and really play with it and really kind of like spread my wings and figure out what was going on. And obviously what was going on was the IOSys and the MS-DOS-sys files should be the very first files on the hard disk. And normally you can run the sys command. I know you guys were already thinking that. Boot off your DOS floppy, sys space C:, press enter, and wait for it to do its magic. Well, I had run, as you recall, the disk defrag program, which had filled up all that space. And not possible. So the next solution to the puzzle would have been, and I didn't know this at the time, again, 13 years old, brand new to DOS computers. I had played with a TI-99 4A before that, and got a little bit into BASIC. Of course, BASIC isn't going to help you fix a DOS computer. I mean, maybe you could get really elaborate and rewrite the file system in BASIC. That would be way above my 13-year-old brain at the time. And before that, I had an Atari VCS, but DOS computers were all new. So the sys command wouldn't work because there was no room to put the sys files on. So, after playing around for a bit, the other choice would have been to completely reformat the C drive and load everything back from floppy disks. Didn't know that either. But I was getting there. And as I played around for a bit, I had also learned about another Norton utility, which was like, I want to say it was Norton Disk Doctor. It might have been. That actually had the brains built into the software to be able to move the stuff out of the first few sectors of the disk to make room for the IOSys and MS-DOS sys files, and then put them back in. And then the machine booted up, and boy, was I proud when that happened. Because it took me like 3 months to figure that out, along with learning a whole bunch of other stuff. And got it up and running, and I was like, look, I did it! This is amazing! This is great! And my high-pitched teenage voice. And going from there, I had learned at that point how to, install software and move software around and all that jazz. And the computers were really, really low level. I mean, you talk about getting close to the metal. I don't think you could get any closer to the metal than some of the stuff you had to do in this. As an example, this was a desktop-based computer, and the hard disk was so primitive that if you took the computer and you turned it on its side and set it on the floor, the sectors and the heads didn't align anymore. There's a solution for that, but they didn't align anymore because that's how primitive this kind of stuff was. This thing had a ST225 Seagate hard disk, 20 megs, made the most beautiful sounds as it ran. The little voice coils inside just every time it tried to write something. I mean, it sounded so chunky. And, sticking the floppy disks in, everything was so like visceral and surreal compared to computers today that are so silent that they even try their best to turn the fans off when they're not needed, just to reduce that noise level even more. So you were really like in this total immersion sensory experience. You had tactile for the keyboard, these big chunky cherry keyboard switches, or the old IBM keyboards. I had a Keytronic, which was foam and foil. And then I didn't even have a mouse on this computer. That's how old this thing was. And it didn't have... No, I think it had one serial port and one parallel port. So there was room to put one in. And I did. I just didn't know if I had to add the card or not. Didn't have sound, didn't have color. Made some chunky hard disk and floppy disk noises. It was just one of those things where you just got sucked into this world. And another thing that my parents did, besides all the computer magazines, was also Sharer of the Month Club. We got a set of 4 floppy disks in the mail every month with a bunch of programs on them. And sometimes they were games like Jill of the Jungle or Commander Keen. Commander Keen's a pretty awesome game. And sometimes they were utilities like PKZip or ARG, as you saw in one of my other DOS command line happiness videos. And sometimes you got like word processors and text editors and all kinds of stuff. So you never knew what you were going to get. So it was always this exploration of what could be next. So I got to do that. Magazines back then, I haven't seen a modern day PC magazine because we've got the internet, and so it's kind of hard to go out and get a magazine just for that purpose. Magazines back then, in the back of the magazine, there was always some little section where there was some utility you could type in or some program you could write in, and you got to learn a lot about different ways of doing things on computers, and you really got to kind of hack around in those days before hacking was a thing. So this 10 megahertz XT, by the time I was done with it and had upgraded, I had got a $89 Logitech TrackMan mouse, trackball, and that was the one where you had your fingers under the buttons and you moved the ball around with your thumb. I've since learned my lesson. I like mice better. I've come back to Team Mouse. Then I put in a VGA card, Paradise VGA chipset, and it could emulate all the different modes that were out there at that time. I actually got Windows to run on it. That was interesting. I don't think we ever upgraded the hard disk. I had this thing that I did where I wrote a batch-based menu system, and when you launched the program, it would change into the directory, it would extract the archive file, the compressed archive file, run the software. When you were done, it would recompress or just delete files that were already in the archive to save some time. So that's how I got more space out of that 20 meg hard disk. It had a 1.2 meg 5.25 inch floppy, and it had a 720K 3.5 inch floppy. And the 720K floppy had a problem, the drive had a problem with its change line sensor and didn't know that you had changed a disk when you changed disk. So you put a disk in, you run dir, you copy files off of it, you do all your disk-based work. You take that disk out, you put a second disk in, and you do dir, and it shows you all the information from the previous disk's catalog because it didn't know that you actually physically changed disks. There was a device line that you could put in config sys that would fix that. So I researched all that kind of stuff and found that clue and went and did it, and it worked. Woohoo! You could make things work on these computers. It was pretty cool. From there, I got an upgrade to a leading edge 286 machine. Started doing some programming in Pascal. My 286 machine, I had dual monitors in because I still had that old leftover monochrome monitor and monochrome card, and now I had the leading edge machine with the VGA card. And so you could write code on one screen, and then you could step through line by line in the debugger, and it would execute on the other screen. And you could see what your program was doing. So I would program on the monochrome display because it had much more crisp text, and it would show up on the old CGA display that I had for that machine. VGA card in there, and it would show up on the VGA card. And that works because the monochrome memory space and the color memory space was two different locations in the memory stack. So there was room for it. So of course you could do it. So dual monitors has been a thing forever. I did parallel port file transfers with LapLink and Interlink, printer hacks. I used to do some light duty CAD work. Just kind of exploring the space of CAD. I did some CAD competitions when I was in high school. And then because I had this background all through high school of playing with computers and programming them and doing stuff with them, my first job out of school was a computer programming type of job. And I got to write programs for that business and helped grow that business, and that one's still going. And then I got into networking and started building out data centers, and now cloud computing is a thing. So you don't need to have your own data center. You can just use hardware in somebody else's data center that you rent by the minute. And it's been a very fruitful career, and I owe a large portion of it to TI Basic on the TI 99.4a, which got me the thought processes of doing programming. I didn't do a whole lot of programming. Those days it was more like copy the thing out of the book and watch it run. Maybe make a change here or there. But for the most part, I mean, the TI Basic programs were like, make a guy move his arms. And that was cool for, 10, 11-year-old kid. And then moving into the PC and doing programming in regular Basic and doing programming in Pascal and doing batch programming. I did a lot of programming in Fox Pro. I did some programming in C, C++. When we went into the Windows world, there was WinBatch. WinBatch was pretty neat because it wasn't really a programming language, but it was almost everything you needed to write a Windows utility. And I wrote a lot of utilities. That's kind of the space that I live in, is in the scripting utility automation space. And that really helped out going all the way through all the different things. And that early summer where I had to figure out how to get those boot up files back in the right location on the disk gave me just a ridiculous amount of confidence for things later on in life, like adding a hard disk to a Novell NetWare server, or building out a storage array, or building out an entire data center from scratch. Like, hey, I want to do a data center business. Let's start this thing up, and running T1 lines and T3 lines in, and eventually moving into like a large Class A facility to migrate all of those machines into a better type of building. Working for a lot of large corporations, working for a lot of small corporations. It's pretty exciting times, and there still is some exciting stuff on the horizons. So that's my story. If you like that story, if you like stories like that, if you like exploring the hobby, I have a whole playlist of videos And love to see you on the channel if you're not already a subscriber. Looking forward to seeing you some more. Leave a comment down below with any interesting story that you have, and search YouTube for the hashtag DOScember for more DOS stories and more DOS goodies. And we also do Septandy, and there's QLvember, and there's DOScember, and I think I might try for this one. How about ZX81 Pro? Doesn't sound as good as DOScember, but it'd be fun to do a ZX81 Pro. So, thanks for being awesome. We'll see you in the next one.